Huh?
So today is Kof Gimel Sivan, Hemshech Tov Reishaim Beis, Almud Tov Samach Aller, Dibra Maschil, Bamidbar, Chag HaShavuos Tov Reish Ayin Dalet, Oeye Etzloi Omer. So here we go. B'siyata D'Shmaya Shabbos Pasha Bamidbar, Erev Chag HaShavuos Tov Reish Ayin Dalet. What is a pasuk in Mishlei, what the Torah, Chachmas HaTorah talks in certain of the prokim of the talks bi'ad atzmai to the Adam. The Kaviyachol that the Torah and its Chachma instruct the Adam how he should behave towards them, and the Milos of Chachma and the Hechreach of the Yediyas of Chachmas HaTorah. That at the end of or the beginning of Perik Vav over there, or Perik Ches rather, that I was literally at the Eberster a small child being brought up. I was like being brought up or sustained and kept by the Eberster in my infant moments. And I was engaged in what you might call spilats, playful games or playful playings, shashuim, by him, by the Eberster, day after day, misacheches lifonov, that I was literally playing in front of him, or I was like a small child that plays in front of its father. And then it goes on to say, misacheches peteivel artzoi. It goes further, the pasuk, and said that I was also playing in the world of his creation, peteivel artzoi. And then it finishes off by saying, V'shashuai es b'nei Adam. I also caused play games and I caused amusement to the human beings in the world that the Eibster created. Hine zehu ma'im ha'Torah, like we said.
That's from Shir Shirim?
Huh?
What's it from Shir Shirim? Mishlei.
It's a Mishlei. Yeah.
What does Rashi say? Does he say that's talking about the Torah? The Rashi,
it's a statement that the Torah says to the Adam. The Torah literally tells the Adam what it was and what it is.
That's the Pshat. That's the Pshat of it.
A psak?
Pshat. Rashi, that's what Rashi
says. Yeah, that's
the
Pshat. What I'm telling you is the Pshat. So he says, Hine zehu ma'im ha'Torah, she'imeres, the Torah says, V'o'eye etzloi omei, that I was literally by the Eberster, a child, or Pirush Rashi, omein gedula etzloi, a growth that was being grown by him, literally. In other words, infant that's being brought up by him. Loshen ha'oimnim aloi seila. But that's a pasuk in the Eicha. We should never have to read it again. But that's in Perik Dalet of the Eicha. But it's written over there that those who had been brought up literally on colored clothes. Toila is from Toilas. It's a form of a very beautiful garment. This is brought down Toilas Shoni, brought down in the Torah. Ha'oimnim aloi toila. Or those that they were brought up on the most beautiful clothes, they were cast and they were thrown into the rubbish heaps. We see the Loshen ha'oimenim olei seila, those who've been brought up upon the good clothes, literally. V'chein pirush b'metzudas David, that over Eya etzlei, hoyishi megudeles etzlei, I was being brought up by him. In other words, an infant that needed to be brought up and developed. V'hainu, sha'atoira nizkad lo v'nis'amno eitzel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Well, if he's equantize, that the Torah grew up, it became brought from smallness to greatness, v'nis'amno, and it was literally looked after or cared for like an infant by the Eibishter. Well, if he's there, Tevis Omerin Huloshen Nifol. It's a passive concept. Shahatura Nisamno, Torah was brought up, or the Torah was developed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu from katnus into gadol. Over Medrash Rabbah, Pasha Bereshis, Perek Aleph, Isa, Al Tikrei Omoin Ela Uman. Don't read Omoin, Ela read as it were Uman. Well, then the word Uman means literally a craftsman or a tradesman. Ela Uman, HaTorah Omeres, Ani Hoyisi, Kli umnosei shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Torah says about itself that it was the tool and the form of Hashem's Kli umnas. Well, if he's there, and according to that, Omein hu loshen uman loshen poyel shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu poyel al yedei HaTorah, because a Kli umnas means a tool that you use in your malacha and in your craft. The tool you are poil pa'ulas in the craftsmanship. But if he's equantize that the Torah is an active figure that the Eibishter carries out things alidei the Torah, and this is b'diuk hafuk from the first pirush, because the first pirush is that the Torah is a makabel from the Eibishter. It's a literally an infant that needs to be brought up and developed and grown up, as it were. And here, if we say poyel and kli umnosei, then that's our opposite concept that the Eibishter brings about in Yonim through the Torah. Literally, he has an umnas there to carry out. He has a craftsmanship that he wants to carry out, and he uses the Torah as a tool. Tzodik lahovin mahu Beis Ayin Yonim b'Torah. Masha Torah nizgadlo v'nisamno eitzel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Or Masha HaKadosh Baruch Hu poel al yedei Torah. We need to understand those two inyonim. What are they? One is that the Torah literally grew up and from infant state by the Eibishter was brought up by him. And the other is that he uses the Torah dafki to be poel his aim and what you might call his umnas and his craftsmanship in the brio. So we need to understand what are those two contrasting inyonim. V'gam tzodik lahovin ma shekosu v'eya etzloi omein v'eya. The word v'eya, albeit if we put a vav in the front of it, but that's the vav, what's called hamahapich. It's a grammatical usage of the vav, and that changes from eya into hoyisi. So the Rebbe said, if the Kavanah was Taka Hoyisi, then why isn't it written Bapashtas Hoyisi? Gam tzarich lahovin mashkos of e'yeh tahava leila meimeh v'hoyisi etzloi. U'kamesha oma hoyisi megudeles haisi klei umanosei. It could have just been written koyisha omru hoyisi megudeles or hoyisi klei. Like the Medrash of our sages said, it could have been just stated directly. So I mean, you could ask that on any in the Torah was written with a vav mahapay. Was it the kavanah from them kasher? So if we learn just another line further, then we'll see what there's a kavana in them. Why the Rebbe said, why don't we just say directly in the past tense? Why don't we put it in the future and then use the Vov Amahapi to turn it into the past?
If you see, is it too far-fetched to say that the Perush Rashi and Metus David, they say it's Poel, and the Bereshis Rabbah says it's Nifal, right?
We've already dealt with that.
No, I just wanted to say one thing. These are Rishonim. These are Tanaim. The Bereshis Rabbah was the Tanaim also is there, and these are Rishonim. I mean, they call it. Say you have the bin hashkafa shel Rishonim Yacharonim. Ahad the Bereshis said Bashin Nifal, Ahad the Bereshis Bashin Poel.
Yeah, Ulai. Yeah. Gam tzori lo mashkozo vo etzloi omen. Tahav leila mema ho yisi o yisi migu teles. Ma ho omri vo sheze loshen osid ve vo hoive. Vo is loshen osid ve vo hoive. As chayre, noch anamia, but the Vov turns it into the past. It wasn't the appearance of that kasha. Or Bezoya, if we see what he has, he brings B'Shem HaZoya, then maybe we'll have some musik into what's the kasha. Or Bezoya Pasha Achrei, Daf Samach Beis, Omer Beis. Isa, the Vo'eye Etzloi Omein, Vo'eye Shashuim, Zo Al Derech Eye Asher Eye. In other words, the two inyonim, they represent the two Loshenas, Ehyeh, Ehyeh Shashuim, or they indicate the name Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. In other words, why is it written twice for Ehyeh? Because it's indicatory of the Madrega of Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh.
Why do you say that? Why do you say Ehyeh?
Because it's a name. It's Hashem's Kodesh. It follows that we could say that the pirush, the usage of the word Ehyeh is bedavke, because it wants to be miramas to that name, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. And therefore, it was written Ehyeh, but it used a Vava Mahapach to turn it into the past. I said, why is it talking in the past? Why can't we just talk in the present? So we have to say that gufa is a chelik of the milas ha'torah. Rashi brings over there that vo'eya etzlei shashuim yoim, or Rashi says yoim shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu 1000 shana, u'k'hayidua sha'torah kodma le'elam 2000 shana. Imamela nimtza lefi zeh that the pasuk is not only being mishabeach certain inyoni tainu shashuai or sha'isi shashuim yoim, but kaviyoho that the Indian of the tainu v'de'evish in the Torah, but it's also hinting at the kadmus and the godless of the Torah. The Torah was kilo not only Ayin by the average of mi reishis inyonim v'hala, but it was also even from kodma la'olam. In other words, that the godless HaTorah is not only it's a kliyum nosei, but it was also kodma la'olam. But the fizel beneath why it's written in the past, why it's written vo'eya shashuim, to indicate that all these milas in the Torah are all there. Oid koidem labriyasa, oidem vo'terem etzema metzias. It follows that we need to have it in the past, because with that gufa is talking about the Maila Atzuma of the Torah Shehi Kodma Le'elam Legamri. Therefore, we need to have it in the past. And if it's written in the past with a Vova Mahapech, and it says Vo'eya twice, because it says that this whole Inyan is talking about the Madrege of the Shem Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. Lefi the how do you call it, Zohar HaKodesh, it's already more miyushav why we wrote it in the present and the future, and we turned it into the past. Because in the present and the future we want to hint at the Shem Kodesh Ehyeh Asher Echye. Or we wrote it with a Vav HaMahavli because Be'emes we're talking about the Milas HaTorah B'Kadmusa. And Mamil, if he said it's already Miyushav, it makes a bit more sense why we didn't write it in the Etzem HaOvar. Because Ein Nachanami, we can't avoid the pshat of the Ovar. The Ovar is Behechreach, that's part of the whole Gadlus. V'tzorik lahovin, ma'hu ha'shaychus Beis pi omim echye, le'vo'eye etzloi omoin, ve'eye sha'shuim. If that's the case, le'lefi divra hazor HaKodesh, and we need to understand that harei, the inyan from the Shem echye, asher echye is pamayim, echye asher echye. What's the pamayim echye? Was it a shayt to those two inyonim of omein ve'sha'shuim? Etzloi omein, ve'etzloi sha'shuim. Was lefizeh kumtois that the two stadim in the holy name, echye asher echye, are shayt to the two inyonim of omein and sha'shuim. It wasn't the shaychus of those inyonim to those two concepts. V'hinei says the Rebbe Berprotius choshiv kan hei inyonim. If we look carefully in this pasuk, then it's like we said, we quoted the pasuk in its fullness at the beginning, that there's 5 inyonim altogether in the hemshech of the pasuk. Hey inyonim ba'Torah, and since we're talking about the Milas HaTorah, then we have to say these are 5 inyonim in Torah. Vo'eye etzloi omein, that's number 1. Vo'eye sha'shuim yoim, that's number 2. Misacheches lefonov b'chol eis, that's the expression. I was playing in front of him at all times. Well, that's 3. Misacheches b'teivel artzoi, and we said that was the hemshech of the pasuk, even though it wasn't written at the beginning of Maimah. And then there was sha'shuai yes b'nei ha'odam. There was a further thing, that I was a plaything for the b'nei Odam. So the Rebbe says that those 5 inyonim, hu k'moi sha'Torah yodo v'nimshcho be'ahei madriges de keser v'chochma bina v'zo malchus ad shiyoda lebi. In other words, the keser is one madrega, chochma bina another, zo another, malchus another, and Yerida to bia is the 5th. If I know, altogether 5 madregas in the Torah. The Mashikos of Voye etzloi omein, I know a Torah k'moshe hi b'keser. That is the madrega in the Torah, it is in the oil shalamayla me'asfiras legamri, atzma saying say. It's miyuchad with atzmusay. Vo'eye sha'shuim yoim u chochma u bina. And that's what it's brought down. Lord Rashi says over there, that's the inyan of yoim is yoim is shal HaKodesh Baruch Hu elef shana, but that's referring to the Alpayim Torah shekodma, the Alpayim Shona shekodma Torah, and it's brought down in many Jerusalem and considers that that's referring to chochma and bina. Misacheches lefono b'chol eis, misacheches b'teivel artzoi, hein zo umalchus. In other words, playing in front of him at all times is zo, and playing literally in the world which he brought about, or does it in for malchus. And why playing? Because playing is the inyan from schoich, and schoich is connected with the inyan from midas. Or Pnimis Ayin is connected with the inyan from oineg and tainu. Or it's well known that the gilui of the oineg is in the inyan hamidas. That's the inyan from Pnimis hamidas. And the Fara says that the inyan from schoich and shashuim with the Eibishter lefono b'chol eis, how that inyan from the midas are still miyuchad with him, or that's in the inyan from zoh. But the inyan from malchus is already going out. The midas are being mashpia hachutza. So therefore it's no longer in him, but it's b'teivel artzoi. And we have to say that means the inyan from teivel artzoi, how it's in mushash in malchus ta. It didn't yet mamish become the world, but it's the shurish of the elements biyah how they are in malchus. V'sha'shuai es b'nei adam, hainu k'moi sheyoda That's already the Torah that came down in the Bria Yetzirah Vasi, yeah? And that's already the union from Bnei Adam, Nivroim, mentioned that already Nivroim in the world, that the Torah is Kilu Mishasheya Gam Oisom. In other words, that the Torah is Mishasheya in Zwei Madrege. It's Mishasheya. Yeah, it be, Madrege Gevoy and Chochma Bina, or that's Chochma Bina Datzilas, Iu V'chayev V'gamei Echad, Mamish Miyuchad Adayim with the Eibishter, and then there's another Shashua, another Oinig with the Torah's Kilum plays, and there's Mishasheya, the Nivroim in Olam Espiyah, what that's called B'chlolos, the union from Bnei Adam. The Kol Hay Madreges Hay B'tainu. Here's where we get, that it's put down in Rov Adrushim, but to get to this pasuk, that the Indian purpose of this pasuk is to be megaver the Indian from Torah, how it's connected with the Indian of Oineg and Tainu. And therefore we say twice the Lashon Shashuim, or Shashuim is indicatory of Tzchok and Oineg. I have some problem over there.
We have Dalit
Huh?
We have Kol Hadalid Madrega, so I'm changing it to Kol Hay Madrega.
It's a mistake. Probably it's been corrected over here. Kol Hay Madregas Heinba, Betainu. But the Indian from these Lashones also are Omein, a child. A young child is an Indian of Oinig. This is one on that the young child calls out in Ovi, the Indian from Oinig. And the same with the Indian from Misakekas Pateivel outside, or that's literally being Misakek or looking forward to the timing which is going to be from the Brias Otamas. And then there's the Oinig from the Etzem Limud and the Etzem Avedas and Nivroim, how they are in Biyawa. That's a very special Miyuchad type of Shashuim, whatever it's called. Shashu I es Bnei Adam. It's a Indian Kilu Miyuchad, or even personal with the Indian from the Torah. However, that's the Hey Madregas, how they are in Oineg. He said, Rak Masha Kosov, Eya Etzloi Omein, he said, Zehu, Kemoisha Torah, he Bechina Shashuim, or Atzmiyim. Like we said, that the small child calls out the Tainuk Pnim Be Atzmi, how it is in the Ov Mamish Bifnei Atzmi. And therefore, Kaviyohu, or also the how the Avish is Misaneg Be, Mamish be'etzem atzmusay, or as we call it in the Hemshech Sam above, the Tainu ha-poshut va-miyuchad beha be'atzmus. In other words, the shurish of all the Tanugim are miyuchad be'atzmusay. The Ayin say, Pechina shashu'ei ha-mela be'atzmusay. And like he brings over there in those drushim, and it's brought down in many places, considers that the melech being as he is, Adam Merumam be'etzem mahusay be'etzem minyone mikol shari b'nei Adam. Wherever there's a inin in the very etzem, the melech where kaviyohu, the melech is misanig aletzem atzmusay, not in an oiv van yeshet. When it's at the etzem maila of the atzmus, there's kilo a miyudige oinig in the atzmus atzmei. And the greater the Adam, the what you might call the deeper and more ultimate is that oinig. Therefore it's called the shashui hamelech biatzmusay. In other words, oinig which is miyuchet mamish with the etzem. And then it's called the tainug haposhut biatzmusay. V'hadalet madreges, here you got the word dalet in a correct way. The other dalet madreges, aim to finish hamshochais v'haoreis hatainu. In other words, that's the union from Oinig Hatz Mamish Miyuchet B'toich Atzma. But all the other four madreges, they indicate already hamshoches or haoreis from hamshoches in the union of the Gilui Atainu already. But even shall gilui v'hamshocha mi'atzma. Omnom, he said, gam b'china shashuim ho'atzmiyim nimshochim b'kol ha'madrega. Here's a politica union, that even though be'emes, all these other madrigas are lower inyanim. The inyanim how that oinig has already been yoitei. By the time you get to teivel artei, then the oinig is already what we call nirkav or murkav in dvorim shu misanei mehem. They're not shashuim mamish, but toicha etem. Mistama afilu at misakeches beteivel. Misakeches lofonov afilu in the inyan of Zohar, in the inyan amidas. That's already in inyanim slightly michutz la'etzem. Can you do it at midas? Already not the inyan of the etzem, or they're already the medium for gilui michutz la'etzem. However, he said, but despite that inyan that they're all amshoches, but even ha'oretz from amshoches, nonetheless he said that shashuim ha'atzmiyim animshochim b'kol rama madreges. Amamela says the Rebbe v'zehu klolos ha'inyan ma'asher Torah oimeres ani hoishi kli umnosei shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yahainu hamshoches b'chinas shashuim ha'atzmiyim b'kol ha'madreges de ishtav shela. This is a pele nifla. Amamela, that's already the beginning of the biur ha'inyan. The mamere ulai yesh loy malafise. The what we medai to boy it's like amen that the Torah skill miskater misamen like a infant by the Eibster. Or that's the Indian of how the Torah is miyuchad beoineg atzmi from the Eibster. And it's kiru one thing with the and it's kiru the oineg atzmi kaviyach of the Eibster betoich atzmi. In mamere therefore it's called Ayin nifal, it's beika nifal alidei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Obedin from klium nase, we made the dictu for that already. Ayin from amshocha begilui, Ayin from poyel. Says the Rebbe, that Indian of that klium nase is gloshen nifal, which is there mitzad the shashuim ha'atzmim, or as a nimshach. This is klium nase that if the Eivester gives forth. There's something then had he heard im hunaisen, then ba'ayin yavihu hunaisen. If he already gives, then he gives the whole shleimus hadova. Amamela the amshocha b'kol ha'madreges is that even though each madreges got its own gilui of the oinig, but we have to say that that's when I get to gilui a certain yerid of amshocha and a certain ha'ora. Aber auch upon him beherem betoich zeh, or ulai yoter beherem, ulai begilui masuyam. There's also the gilui of the oineg ha'atzmi b'chol ha'madreges b'chol ha'ayin inyonim. Amamela the tight kli nosai is not just that he uses the Torah in order to get to another inyan. No, alidei the inyan of the Torah is megala the inyan k'moshe who esloi bedvarim shemi chutz mimenu. In other words, that the Moshe, the kli umnas is beika that he gives over, and he's how do you call it megala atzmusay alidei that kli, and that's the chiddush in that pshat, because normally the kli umnas is the inyan which is only megala certain inyanim lefiera chitanium in the autumn kiyadua. So what he does b'derech umnas is not necessarily a raya. It's nishmase only on chushim sheyosh levachulu. And though the taich the kli itself gives over the very achmiyas of the oineg b'kol ha'madreges, even though they may be begole only ha'oris v'am amshoch. Lefizeh kommt.
Is that what you're saying? That the nifal is the highest madrigas in the poel?
Not necessarily.
I mean, you said the nifal, that's a Torah was by the Eibishter Shashon Batzmi.
Yeah, well,
the poel is actually nimshach.
Yeah, well, Fia Pshat is a lokach. That's what I'm saying. That is in effect a chiti. That's exactly what we're not saying. What we're saying is that the inyan of the kli umnas is that it brings the inyanim how they are nifolim b'toich atzmai into the givdam shochas and the hora. You follow? That the same inyan how it is b'pnimius goes over into each prat of the gilui. You follow? That's what I just spent a bit of time being masbir. That here the idea of the kli is a different idea. Here it gives over the inyan of the atzmius together with the inyan of its megala. So we have to say that that's inyan what will be doirish biyo ha'im zeh mamish begolui or im zeh behelem b'miktas b'toy kol madrega Eik Shehu, aber upon him does it the Matthias Ayin. Well, if he's come to it, it's of course all. You can't say that the Eibishter is only Misanig from Inyanim Musayomim. No, every Inyan and every Prat and every Dova, Hanimshach, it's got the ability to be good the same. Oineg Ha'achmi, v'yesh b'zeh, Inyan Oineg Ha'achmi, Kol Chad Lefum, Inyonei, the Eibishter Mishtasheh, and Mitzape, Mimenu, exactly what he looks from, Chochmah and Bina Datzil. And that's what we see, that the Baal Shem Tov was misanig very much with the Anoshim Apshutim, and he was Megara de Erech, Otum, and he found Mokim, call Echad ve'Echad, because in Yoni was to be Megara, that Tainug, and that Tainug Achmi, we could say B'derech Efshe. His Indian was to be Megara, that Oineg Achmi, how it's Nimtza, B'chol Prote Habriya, Afila Adla Mata Mata, in the Anoshim HaPshutim, the Kliyum Nosei Shalakorish Bo, which is the Torah, brings the Etzem Shashuim Gam to them also. And that's the Pshat that we see that on the contrary. Dafki, when the Doyos are Yoyred, Lamata Yetzer, Dafki, they're the ones that are going to bring the Gile Haki Elyon and the Ki Niflo, or does it take from Miyad, the Inif and the Gura Shlema Miyad Mamik. Because it's fraying every moment now, if it's not Miyad, then Adma Sai. That you have one in the clan as Amatsu. We got up and said that there's going to be two separate Madinas with the Gansarin, Revis Oisid, Rahman in the clan, Hoya Lycia. Avavela, we have to have the Indian of Miyad Achshov, the whole Indian. I come to this famous Shiloh, who we worth, what are we worth? You know, these little how do you call it, Meisler, these little mice playing away at the bottom of the whole ladder of his Staumschule. You know, it's brought down Perek Yud Ches. The Malchus, and the Nefesh, the Malchus, the Ashio. Od Yoter, Ulai, right down at the bottom. At the ladder, and Dafki, they're going to bring Moshiach, Dafki, they're going to be Megala, Asamin, Sotinia. Dafki, the Tainug Achmi, and the Kliyum Nosa, through Torah, and through the instruction in Torah, Alidei, Melech HaMoshiach, even that level can be object of the Etzema Oineg of the Eibishter, and it can be Zeichet to be Megala, that Etzema Ayin. Remember a gewaltige Musa Haskell. Sha'al Yom HaOda, that who am I, or who is what's a prat in the Bria, Mazeh Choliot Kokach Chashuv, Kokach Sigdiku, and V'Kayetze. But the fact, as we look in Tanya the other day, if you look over there, Perek Lamadala, well, that's only sort of moved a bit ahead from Perek Yud Ches and Yud Tes. Other Inyonim, so over there the Alter Rebbe is making the cheshbon how you have to, from Merilus, you have to come with Simcha, and he says that you have to be Mizbeinen, that your goof is how do you call it, Shikutz for Tiyuv and the whole in, and then inside you got your Nefesh Elokis. That's what you should worry about. You should worry about your Nefesh Elokis, forget all the rest of it. A famous passage over there, and he said, "Yesh bi Nefesh Elokis." Yes, Chelik Halakam Mimar, Chelik Hashem. Yeah, V'chulim, he's Meshabbat, Nefesh Elokis, with different Lashonos. And then he says, Asher Yeshnei, Gam B'Kal Sheba, Gam B'Kal Sheba Kavim. That's it. So that's also in the culture of the. And then he goes further, what your cheshbon is. There was enough community that's also the. In earlier chapters we had to say it was in the culture of the Kalim. Of what's got to do with it? It's all in the culture of the Kalim. The touch is that the Alter Rebbe means that having an Nefesh Elokis, having an Nefesh Elokis which are Chelik Halakam and Mal, has got nothing to do with Yichus or with Kishrenas or with who you are or what you are. If you're a Nivra Lamata Mutaguf, but you happen to be a Yehudi, then inside you got a Azamin unbelievable Zachos Heist, with all the things, Chelik Halakam. Everybody's got it. Everybody can be good at that. That inyan atzmi that anybody else can do. That there's any inyan in the bria which is not the object of the atzmis or the atzmis ha'oinik. Anyway, even though it may not be a direct right of what we were saying here of Zicha. All right, so the Rebbe says that's what we might call the lead-in to the whole Maimah. In order to understand this whole inyan, which is the shurish of the Tanugim, ha'atzmim, the shashuim ha'atzmim, shashuim ha'atzmim nimshochim b'kol ha'madreiga, and how the shashuim ha'atzmim tache nimshach b'kol ha'madreigas was mitzad the machiv shebetainu, and the machiv shebetainu v'madreiga zu, one can already say, well, the machiv hamiti is nimtzah b'kol mokim. What is a nidv shot? He's not talking about the milas ha'machiv, which he's nimtzah b'lavohi. What he's saying is that it's nimshach b'chol ha'madreigas. Mashmi is that that's nimshach bi'atzmius u'mislavish b'kol madreiga who lefi inyan of that madreiga, not just mitzad the ma'ila damaki. Yesh lahaktim masha kosu. We've already had this. Already, it's the pasuk in Yeshaya Novi at the beginning of capital Kof Hey. Hashem Elokai Ato. Hashem Avaya. You are Elokai, Ato Elokai. Arumimcha. I'm going to elevate you. Uideshmecha, and I will give literally thanks, or I will admit to your name, or give thanks to your name. Va'isa bezoiha pasha bolach. Daf Kuf Tzadik Gimel Amud Beis. Da Hashem Elokai Ato Koilo Kol Ha'eshes Firas Da Atzil. I state that in the Zohar, that the Zohar doesn't say it's Koilo Ha'eshes Firas Da Atzil. The statement is to pick their lotion, but the Zohar is medactic that those words Hashem Elokai Ato are Koilo all sorts of inyanim shoinim which are identifiable with the inyan of the Esser Spirit. And therefore it says, Hashem Elokai, Eim Chochma U Bina. Hashem, B'Chochma, as is well known, Havaya B'Chochma, the Shem Havaya is indicator of Chochma. Elokai, Elokim, Chaim, as is well known, particularly is the inyan from Bina. So therefore Elokai, Elokim, how it relates to me literally, well, that's the inyan of Bina. The Rebbe already was medactic in that earlier. And then he says, Bina, Ato, who chesed. Or the inyan from Ato is chesed, Malchus. It's also Malchus. What's with all the other spheres? So the Ikka of all the midas is chesed, Kiyadua, and Malchus is the Ikka of Malchus. Malchus is the last of all the spheres, and it's Mekabel from all the. So we have to say that even though he only mentioned chesed, Begolui, but that's Koil, as the famous Lashon occurs in the Zohar Kodesh itself, the chesed is the yoima, the ozul im chulhu yomin. The chesed is literally the yom, the gilui, the midas which goes with all the midas, as is one of. All the midas have in themselves the milo, or the inyan of chesed, because their inyan is gilui to the makablim, and the inyan from ato is also. Why is ato chesed? Because ato is gilui. If you say to a mensch ato, well, that means he's begolui lecha. In other words, he's appearing to you. Well, that's inyan from chesed, and it's also well known that Aleph and Tov are the beginning of the ACS and the end of the ACS, and Hey is the inyan of the Osa Kalila, the Leis Pei Mashosha, is one on. Hey is the Ikka of the pronunciation of all the ACS. And that's indicatory of Malchus. Because Malchus is the inyan of Olam Adibur, the inyan of ACS. We ask V'oima alzeh, and then having told us that, the Zohar Kodesh says that Yeshaya Novi says alzeh anu mimcha. We have to elevate shetzrichim l'reimeim klolos ha'ishtavsheles bi'atzmes serein So in other words, once we've got to the spheres of Atzilus, and the spheres of Atzilus are the mamutza, through which it becomes the whole Seder of Seder Ishtalshus, Negilu HaMoichin V'Amidas, V'chuluhum. So then the Aveda is to elevate Shatrichim L'Reimeim Klolos Ishtalshus Ba'atzmasein. So if you have to elevate the whole inyan of all the spheres that come out in the latter oilam as koilo kola ishtalsheles, and you have to be mareimem and makasha them in atzmasein. See, because Sokosov, today to get to the spheres, and there's one on the famous parsa that there is between Keser and Chochmah, and then there's another parsa between Chochmah Stimor and Chochmah Gluya. There's all sorts of parsois for tzimtzumim in order to get to the Gila of the spheres. The whole Indian is Arumimcho. We have to elevate all those inyonim to a bittul mamish in Atmasein. Yeah, in Atmasein say. The Hine Posik there, as we heard earlier, Oma Yeshayahu Benavua Ke'ein Hakdoma Lahanavua She'oma Chakak. That he said this Posik like a lead-in, like a what you might call a introduction to the Nevuah that he says immediately after that, and that is V'samto Me'ir Legal, that you have made from a city into a heap of stones. Shezeu Bitl Malchuste Noiga. Now we had this earlier, remember, in some of the Mamorim that we brought down, that was the Indian of Bitl, the Malchus of Noiga, literally the city of Noiga has to be turned into a gal, into a heap of stones, a heap of oisias, pali, kol efshodias, to express themselves. Klal, in other words, Ayin from Beetle Legamre. What's this Indian of the Malchus de Noiga? That's what we saw earlier in the Hemshech, that the Indian was talking about Esau, and I say the Pshitas. Over there Rashi says, Samte me'ir legal, Samte me'ir de Soir, as I thought to myself that. For the city of Soir, he made it into a gal of Soir, referring to Esau. But that's what we need nowadays. But the Chifas Gedola Vatsuma. But the trouble is that the Yidden make the whole Indian into a huge city. They make the whole city of Noiga into the ganze Indian. They do it. And then comes along Esav and he says, oh yes, I'm saying this. But he's not saying anything. Saying, one in front. Hoye Lucia, the Yidden. Edify, kommt Dad, we've got to be Mavatal, the whole Indian of the Indian of Noiga. So therefore said the Rebbe, what's with all the other clippers? I've got to be Mavatal, the whole in of all the clippers. Was it was Noiga? So we saw the diuk in that earlier in the Maimon from Shir Amalais, the Maimon from Rosh Hashanah. We saw in that Pipaulas Noiga is the Ike Shurish, the rise of all the clippers, because he's the Mamutza. As the Alter brings in Tan in Perek Zayin, that the Mamutza to all the clippers is the infant Noiga. The regular what you cut Noiga off, and you're Mavatal, the whole Indian for Noiga, Ein Lehem, Shurish Yanika Yuteh, they will also fall and they'll lose their whole power to be Yoinik, Klav, and Kedusha, because Ika Yanikosim, Kedusha is Alidei, the Indian of Noiga. Therefore, we talk about the Ika Bitl in the Indian of Noiga. So that's what Yeshaya Novi is aiming at. His ultimate purpose in the Nevuah is Samto Me'ir Lagal, but in Eda Obihei She'ir Bitl Malchus Noiga. In order there should be such an amazing Bitl in the whole Indian of the Clippers, Bepchinas Bitl Legamre, absolute Bitl. You see, the Rebbe didn't mess around when he was hitting at these guys. He hit at them, Boyfriend Amiti. That should be a name from Bitl Legamre. Zehu Davke Alidei Amshochas Chodosh Mi'atzmus Ein. Say, that is what we saw the famous Musik. It's only going back a few Maimorim now to the Maimorim back there towards the end of Elul and the Rosh Hashanah. We saw several times in the Lashon of the Hemshech, the Lashon Chadosh. Davke alidei des armimcho, alidei des aliyah from the whole clothing sistauses into atzmas ain't say, then that causes a isoirus that kiras yaitze a new oil, yeah, and the Rebbe keeps referring to it as a oil chodosh. And if there'll be a oil chodosh, then there'll be not only gile elakus otzim, but kol ha'ishtauseles of a b'derech mamera, all the managdim, or all the yoinkim, leminayim, or sugeim, all of them will be mishpatel b'derech mamera. So what is a taicha oil chodosh? We already discussed it at considerable length now. The pshat of oil chodosh means as a oil which has never been ad ato in the whole seder hagiloim, mamish mirashis kol hagiloim ad ato. And those are the pshat oil chodosh. Or you might say, well, every second is a new oil. Amachadish b'tuvi v'choliyim tomit ma'aser b'reishis. So emes, that's a new oil of its all in even from madregas which have been before. In other words, chidush ayeh shonas as it's called. Be'etzem mahus of that oil, it's a new gilui. Of that mahus has already been there, but before b'dugma mesuyam zubedim min mesuyam mirega el. Mirega el rega v'asim lakachu, that to a certain extent oilam kamin hogei, oilam kamin hogei noihe. It's just that if you have real eyes to see, then you probably see how every moment the world is not just oilam kamin hogei noihe, but you see all sorts of unbelievable chidushim which are happening b'chol rega b'chol rega v'rega. And those who are mamish able to open their eyes and to see, then they see where it's heading for, where it's going, and all that's happening. There was a zet, it looks to be the same word, but rega zet, it was a rega. Lifney's there, or at least he can be misbainan, and he can know that it's new in yonim. Oba, the pshat is that mi'ain in yonim elo has already been. Oyer chodesh means it'll be as amin sort, that the whole vishtaushus has never had that type of thing before. Why do we need an oil chodesh? B'shul ma? Tzrichim oil. B'shul ma tzrichim oil chodesh. How do we find there's a very fascinating Indian that Ayin chodesh matter satzmi mi Beis asurim. It's well known that once you've got into a certain Indian, and that's become your Indian kavua, then you need a power. And it's interesting, I saw in a sefer not long ago, I was in a sefer that the Mechaber of the sefer come, I can't remember exactly where I saw it. I have bring to them posig, I'm sorry, that Maimon Chazal, Ein Chovish, Moiti Atmi, Beis Asurim. Of course, a portion, it looks to be a portion to Zach. I just can't remember, you have to forgive me, I can't remember, but you Beis Indian, who we've here there. We see that once you go into a certain Seder, then in order to go out of it, you need to have a you can't just get out with a harogim. And particularly if there's already been an Indian of Yanika, and there's already Inyonim, which have brought to what him built Tirutsuim and Toitzoes, like Klippas Negev or Lamantum is there, then that means that the whole Seder shows us to a certain extent is fixed in a certain way, and therefore if Bibal is fixed in that way, they can find their way also. And Amir today same Vatal sein legamre, those are the word. A bissel is there up there, and you could give a little bit more extra Penimin, that would give them a shochel, or give them a clap, can or lekan. Although we see that the derech in Inyonim is that they're Meseirim, they tend to be Meseirer Oidapah. You have to have a whole new sug, and therefore the Rebbe calls it Hadat. In other words, there's never been anything quite like that before. It's completely another sug, Shel Oyer. And as a Philippic Indian, we have no musik exactly how that's going to be. B'duk Beis Oifen. So but it has to be b'teikev or miyad mamish. It has to be well mamish. So I can see that our Kohen he wants to say something here. What's the song here?
Does that mean that I'm not the same person that I was a second ago?
Eh?
I'm not the same person I was a second ago?
No, what's our child with that? That's a pshita. That's absolutely obvious. Well, we see it. No, you're not the same person you were before. A few minutes ago. You're not supposed to be. For all sorts of reasons. All sorts of reasons. But it's all relative. He's going to get a shock. He's you're Superman. You are Superman. We're all Superman, much more Superman than what we think. The thing is that it's all in an oven of relativity. You're totally new, but you're new in the alter way. You know what I mean? You're new, but you're new bedugma to how you were before. There's new possibilities and new inyanim which are opening in front of you the whole time. Chadasha is another sug altogether of Ashpah, where the whole inyan will just be another organized colors altogether, and then there'll be all sorts of inyanim which are not Rafi Seder HaRogil B'Klal. For example, one of them is that, like we saw in the previous Maimah, he'll start having our sogas in Atzmas Ein Tzeif. Who knows what's by inyan? Okay, and then already the whole inyan of the Chovush will be muta alidei the Chodesh HaLamayla Mimena. He will be moitzi. Like the Rebbe was Madbir, become a piyomim, that the Golitz are Beis Asurim Godel, Rachman in it. It's a huge Beis Asurim, and Kedei Lohoichim, Beis Asurim, it's a tremendous inyan called the Gula Shlema, and they're going to say inyan. Remember, that's a kavanah here. In order to get rid of all that hole and all that unique that has grown on the Seder Atkoin, there's going to have to be a Hamshocha Shaloi Alidei Koyach Atzmi for the whole Seder Ishtalshus. There's going to have to be a Koyach Atzmi Lamaila Kedei Lahoitzias Kol Seder Ishtalshus from the Beis HaAsurim, which is the inyan, begins with Noiga and it ends up, who knows, where Chasve Sholem. Obidei Shia Bittel Malchus Tanei Bepchins Bittel like Gamrei Davka Alidei Hamshocha Soel Chodesh Me'atzmas Ein Tzei Obidei Sheti Hamshocha Tzorech Li Tchila Haloha. Oh, this is the whole inyan we saw. In order that there should be a inyan, Hamshocha, then there has to be Tchila Ayin of Ha-Loa. And that klal is not being lost, says the Rebbe. In order to bring down a Hazar Gilu, which is completely new, B'kol HaIshtaus, and new Be'etzem Asug V'Amahuz, you have to do something also. By you also has to be Ayin from Ha-Loa, and that's what Yeshaya Novi says, Aramimcho L'roimem Klolos Aishtausheles Be'atzmas Ein Tzei V'alidei Zeh Nimshecha Chodosh. Shezeh, what he says immediately after that, Oideh Shamecha. The Oideh who b'chinas Hamshocha, V'Hamshocha who b'Shimcho, b'chinas Malchus. V'alidei Zeh Yeh Bittel Malchus de I will give thanks and I'll be bottled completely to the new Gilibeh Shmecha. I'll be with Santo me Irle. Look how it was the Bittel in the whole Innivan Malchus Tanoiga. And Lafisa Kuntais that every Indian has got to have the Haloa Hamatima to the Hamshocha. So Yesh Lema that this whole inner of the Aramimcho, or that's an Aveda Chadosha by the Nivroi. We have to say that that's in them a new Tnua, which has never also been ad koi, and that's going to be the Haloah, which will cause the Indian of the Shocha. And that's what we see, that every generation's got its own particular Inyan. Our Yesh Lema, that this Aramimcho has been going in stages. And now we've reached this particular moment in the history the ganze Seder Histauscheles, and that's where we hold now, is our Avodah is the final Arab Mincha. It's the last step of the Arab Mincha, and Mamela, like the Rebbe said, the Gila, the Chodesh, Kipshutai, of Goloi Mamish, and the whole Klolis Histauscheles, until there'll be the Indian of Oida Shimon. Now, Oida means Ayin from Gilui, but it also means something that you have to just be moida to. You can't really understand it or be masig it, but Chilas Ayin. Yeah? And therefore, but Hascholas Chodosh, it'll still be Ayin from Oida. Or I saw in last Maimah that Alidei, the Etzem Minyan, like the Rebbe said, Kabbalah's Mashiach Tzidkenu, that be the Etzem Iskalah of the whole Inyan of the Yosid, then will also be masig the Chodesh. V'achachach Mavaya, Oifanam Shochad Chodesh, V'meshakosuk Ki Asisa Pele, Eitzeis Mirochik, Emunas Oimen. So we'll see, that, like we saw, now he gets onto that last point. I have to stop now because I've got a dumb matter with the Bochen. Is that we saw that infant Asisa Pele, well, that was the Levusha he brought down over there from the Zohar Kodesh, that there's this Levusha Chadar, which is Malbish. Chochma Stimor, the Kavanah in the Zohar Kodesh, and that's just like a Levush. I'm sorry, it's not a Levush. It's just like a Kisui, and a Helem, Masuyam, on the Iniv and Chochma Stimor, but immediately you are Magir to that, and the right off, and it just falls away, and you have the Etzem. Therefore, it uses the expression Kisuya Vilavusha, or not the Iniv and Lavush, but the Harogim, but the whole Richas that we saw in the previous Maimorim, and then we get down to a new Pirish that he brings from the Zoya in Asisa Pele. So, zijn en Zaif en Asisa Pele, Chevra, daarvan in de Pele bepaal manisch. Very good, Puri Chokmas. You have to have the Pele, and the Eivse Hof